And just say as well, welcome to Kirsty, Phoebe's mum. It's great to have you with us. And to Esther and her family as well. We're going to be baptising Esther as well at the end of the service. So a particular welcome to you guys. Well, we're in a series, God on the Move, where we're following Jesus as he moves from the desert of temptation, which we looked at last week, right the way through to Jerusalem, where he'll die on the cross, be buried, and ultimately rise again. Just a bit of a spoiler for Easter Day there for you. Last week, we looked at whether in our faith, we were asking Jesus to be just like a tourist in our life, just asking him to come along for a little bit, see the best bits, or whether we were asking him to fully move in. And this week, as we join Jesus, he begins to move towards Jerusalem and, of course, the cross. And we join Jesus today in our reading as he basically says to those who've been following him, are you following me on a bit of a tourist trip? It's just seeing the best bits, but when it gets a bit tough, you're just going to go back home? Or are you fully in, moving your whole life to follow me, come what may? Now, if I was going to sell you these sweets, we've already established how much they cost, but before you agreed to buy them off me, you would want to know, presumably, how much they cost. You need to work out the cost of something before you agree to buy it. How much are these worth? £1. So if I said £1, you might be happy to buy them because that's the cost. We've agreed the cost. I give you the sweets, you give me £1, all sorted. Before you buy something, you work out the cost before you decide whether you can afford it. You wouldn't go shopping, load up your trolley, go to the supermarket, check out, and find you had no money to pay for it. You wouldn't go to buy stuff if you couldn't afford it. You wouldn't buy a house if you knew you couldn't afford the mortgage on it, maybe. But there's a second question we ask ourselves when buying something. We ask ourselves the question, is it worth the money? You see, you might say that you want to buy this pack of Haribo, and for £1, that's probably worth it. If I was to say, who would like to buy this off me, but it costs £50, anyone interested? 50p? £49? 48.50? £2? No? £1. £1. Okay, you work out what is something is worth before you agree to buy it. Now, in today's passage, Jesus, like I said, is on the move again. He's heading to Jerusalem, and he knows that for him, the cost of his journey is going to be really high because he's going to the cross. The cost of Jesus' trip to Jerusalem is so high that it's going to cost him his life. What is so valuable that it's worth Jesus laying down even his life? Any idea? What is so valuable that Jesus is prepared to lay down even his life? Us, you and me. It's worth that high cost for Jesus because of you and for me. Because he wants us to experience life in all its fullness so much that he pays for it with his life on the cross. And that's what this passage is about today. Here he's saying to those following him, and today to you and me, he says, if you don't pick up your cross and follow me, you can't be my disciple. Just let that sounds, just listen again. If you don't pick up your cross and follow me, you can't be my disciple. Now that sounds a little bit hard. That sounds, in fact, like Jesus is maybe trying to stop people from following him. He's got a whole load of people following him, crowds following him. Perhaps they want a bit of a day trip. Perhaps they want a day out. Perhaps they want to see another miracle. They've heard about the miracles Jesus did, so they want to come and see one. Perhaps there's just a bit of a crowd mob mentality. Perhaps there's a few Brits among them, and so they just see a queue and decide to join it without knowing what it is. Sorry. But basically, Jesus turns around to this crowd and says to them, if you're just a day tripper, if you can't come with me all the way to Jerusalem and the cross, do you know what? Don't bother. Go home. Unless you're serious about following me, go home. Now, Jesus, of course, is not trying to get rid of them or us, but he does want us to know what it is we're getting ourselves into when, like Phoebe, we say, Jesus, we want to follow you. There is a big cost involved to following Jesus. It isn't always easy. If you are sat with your parent, or if indeed you're not a parent, but you happen to have one, just for a moment, get your smartphone out and just pop it on the calculator mode. Okay, we're going to do a bit of arithmetic this morning. We're going to count the costs together. I'm trusting you not to try and go on Word. Oh, no, I've already told you what Wordle is. I'm trusting you just to stay on the calculator. So, I don't know. We're going to calculate the cost of following Jesus. So I just want to think of a really big number. My brain's quite small this morning. I'm not functioning properly. I've only had one cup of coffee. So let's start with, 5,248. If you can put that into your calculators. 5,248. It's going to come up on the screen, a little slide as well. There we go. 5,240. That seems like a big number, a good place to start when we're thinking about the high cost of following Jesus. Let's start there. 5,248. Thanks for listening. So there's a high cost. It means following Jesus all the way. We know it's not going to be easy. But even more than that, Jesus is saying following him isn't just sometimes tough, isn't just going with him where he'll go, but it might even mean laying down your very life to follow him, being prepared to give everything. And there's people around the world and throughout history, there's people in the world today who are giving their life for Jesus because of what they believe. That's why he says, are you ready to take up your cross? The cross was a symbol of death. For some people, that's a reality. But for us, whom it's unlikely for, Jesus is saying, would we be prepared to even do that? Are we prepared to give up everything, to put to death our own ideas, our plans, our desires, and exchange them for him? Now, for us as a family, there's lots of ways we've sort of tried to do that. One of the ways, I guess, being a vicar is we've moved around a little bit. And what happens is we live and work in a place where God calls us, and we start making some really good friends, and we love the church there. But then God's called us on to somewhere else. And we want to go because God's called us. And there's loads of new people and loads of new stuff to discover. But it's really hard to leave friends, to leave schools, to leave colleagues. And so for us, that's one of the ways that we've counted the cost in following Jesus. And for you, there may be other things. It may be looking unpopular at school because you say you follow Jesus. It may be you act justly where other people don't. It may be at work you stand up for things that others don't. It may be that you choose to pay your tax properly while your colleagues. There's all kinds of ways that following Jesus means the cost is high. And that's what baptism is all about. Baptism is about putting to death our own ideas, plans, and desires and exchanging them for a life with Jesus. So we need a bigger number than 5248. So could you press plus? So we've got 5248 plus, and I'm going to go bigger here. So let's say I've got to read this now. 5,350,130. It's going to come up on the screen. 5,350,100. That is big, right? So we're going to go big. That is counting the cost. Press equals. Press equals. And you should have, let's have that figure, 5,355,378. We have calculated a big cost of following Jesus. So we know following Jesus has a high cost. But if you remember, the second question was, Corrado, would you buy that for £50? You would? Would you buy these sweets for £50? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. Right answer. Because it's not worth £50. So we know the cost of following Jesus. But is it worth it? Is it worth it? Well, if you think about, I don't know, a football team, they don't just play on days when it's sunny. They don't just train on days when it's lovely and sunny. They don't just play games that they know that they will win. They train on awful rainy days. They're prepared to lose, and they go through it. Why? Because at the end of it, there's a chance to win the cup. There's a chance to win the title. And so the cost is worth it. I know many of you are studying, you're doing exams at school, you're at uni, maybe some of you are in your professional development doing, why do we study? It's awful. The reason we study is because at the end of the day, we want a job that we can use to glorify God. And so we put in the hard stuff so that the reward is greater. There's a cost, but it's worth a lot more in the end. Jesus said this, I think there's a slide, Luke chapter 9. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me, gives up everything for me, a high cost for me, he will save it. What good is it for a man or woman to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Jesus here is turning things upside down. There may be a high cost to following Jesus, like in our calculators. But if you just turn your calculator upside down for a moment, and you might need to squint, depending on what font you've got on your calculator. But it's on the screen to help you as well. Can anyone tell me what that word says? Blesses. Can you see that number upside down says blesses. You see the cost. I know, you're blown away, aren't you? It works better on a calculator where the 4 is the old. Anyway, there's no 4 in that. What am I talking about? Just seeing if you're listening. The cost of following Jesus is high. He says, take up your cross and follow me. Following Jesus is not always going to be easy. It can be hard work. But Jesus turns that upside down and says, whoever wants to save his life, whoever wants to hold on to his stuff, to not pay the cost, they'll lose their life. But whoever's ready to pay the cost, to lose their life, what they will find is that Christ will give them so much more. They will find their life. He will bless them abundantly. We were talking about that in the 9:15 this morning. You can know a life of love, of joy, of peace, of patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. You can experience a life where, although there's still difficult stuff going on around you, rather than it feeling rough, life begins to feel a bit smoother, even if the outward situation doesn't change, because Christ came that we might have life and have it in all its fullness. And so as we journey on with Jesus to Easter through Lent's a great time to just count the cost. Are we willing to count the cost to follow Jesus? Because following Jesus can be difficult. It can even lead to us giving up our very life for him. But it's worth it. It is worth it because of all the blessings that he gives us in return. Amen.